All right, we have some major breaking news, and I do not want this story to fly under the radar because we just learned that ABC News has officially fired journalist Terry Moran after suspending him multiple days ago, and all because he criticized Stephen Miller. He criticized a member of the Trump administration and then every other member in a coordinated fashion, including Caroline Leavitt, and Stephen Miller's wife came out to protect him. They all came out and said Terry Moran should be fired. And ABC News said, you know what? I guess that's a good idea. We should listen to the Trump administration and how to handle the media because the Trump administration is a great model for how the media should be treated. Obviously, I say that in jest. We are witnessing an escalation in attacks on the press that should alarm everybody, and it's happening on two fronts. I've been toying around with the concept, and this is not new, but the idea of authoritarianism in a suit versus authoritarianism in a uniform. And the best way to depict this is the fact that journalist Lauren Tomasi was shot in the leg with a less than lethal round a few days ago. We've all seen the clip that went incredibly viral of a cop intentionally targeting her, an LAPD officer intentionally shooting a journalist who had her back turned. That is authoritarianism in a uniform. That is the president mobilizing the National Guard or the Marines to directly suppress dissent or the media. Now, there's also a more insidious form of authoritarianism, and that happens through suits. Not only the people wearing suits like lawyers, but through lawsuits and the courts, and through chilling dissent, through public intimidation. But the public intimidation is a lot more insidious. Again, it happens through the courts. If you've ever played piano, there's like a soft pedal and there's a loud pedal. Now, the loud pedal would essentially be the Marines going out there, being the show of force. The soft pedal is what's happening behind the scenes, rising, the more subtle tones of authoritarianism. But let's break down this post and break down how we got here. A few days ago, we learned that ABC News had suspended Terry Moran for a now deleted tweet about Stephen Miller. And the tweet was very solid. This is what started it all. Terry Moran said, "The thing about Stephen Miller is not that he is the brains behind Trumpism. Yes, he is one of the people who conceptualizes the impulses of the Trumpist movement and translates them into policy. But that's not what's interesting about Miller. It's not the brains, it's bile. Miller is a man who is richly endowed with the capacity for hatred. He is a world-class hater. You can see this just by looking at him, because you can see that his hatreds are a spiritual nourishment. He eats his hate. Trump is a world-class hater, but his hatred is only a means to an end, and that is his own glorification. That's his spiritual nourishment." So he's drawing a distinction between Stephen Miller hating because the end goal is hate versus Trump, who uses hate as a vehicle for self-glorification and building his legacy, which you could argue whether or not it's working. But this is actually a pretty astute post written by somebody who's worked closely with the Trump administration. But the next morning, after he deleted it, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, says, "Last night, in a since-deleted post, so-called journalist Terry Moran went on a rampage against Stephen Miller and called President Trump a world-class hater. This is unhinged and unacceptable. We have reached out to ABC to inquire about how they plan to hold Terry accountable. And I guess it worked. I guess ABC decided to listen to the Trump admin. Can I just point out the fact that when we're talking about unhinged and acceptable behavior on social media, you represent the President of the United States, who has said about 10 times over the past 24 hours that Governor Gavin Newsom of California is actually new scum. He is unhinged. He is world-class unhinged, if you want to use Terry Moran's phrases. But again, the assault on the media is happening on two fronts, both in the streets and it's happening in a more insidious way. JD Vance then says, an ABC journalist at Terry Moran posted this absolutely vile smear of Stephen Miller. It's dripping with hatred. Remember that every time you watch ABC's coverage of the Trump administration. As it happens, I know Stephen quite well, and he's motivated by love of country. He's motivated by a fear that people like Terry Moran make rules that normal Americans have to follow, but well-connected people don't. I'm sorry, you're coming from the administration that has crypto meetings behind the scenes that only millionaires can get into. What are you talking about, well-connected people following rules? It's why he fought so hard to get President Trump elected, says J.D. Vance regarding Stephen Miller. And then Stephen Miller's wife comes to his defense. He says, Katie Miller says, "This is why Americans don't trust the legacy media. When masks are down, you see the radical left-wing bias at ABC. These are the people feeding propaganda across the airwaves under the guise of righteousness." She then says, Terry Moran should be fired from the network immediately. And ABC News, multiple days later, takes the advice of Katie Miller. ABC News will not renew the contract of veteran correspondent Terry Moran after a now deleted controversial post about Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance, and then Caroline Leavitt, and then everybody else in a coordinated way tried to lose Terry Moran his job. ABC News told CNN's Brian Stelter, quote, "We are at the end of our agreement with Terry Moran, and based on his recent post, which was a clear violation of ABC News policy, we have made the decision not to renew." Now, for some interesting news, I saw the fact that MeidasTouch, Ben Meiselas, made, a public announcement saying, Terry Moran, if you're looking for a new home that is unapologetically pro-democracy, where you can talk about Stephen Miller and his bile without worrying about your job, you can come over to MeidasTouch. Someone said, what Terry Moran posted about the odious Stephen Miller is 100% true. Moran should not have been fired. He should have been given a raise, but news networks are terrified of Donald Trump's wrath. They are just like the GOP members of Congress. Which is true. Not only does Donald Trump have a rabid fan base that can primary basically any Republican in Congress, but he also somehow lucks his way into winning, or at least getting a settlement with all of these lawsuits against the media because they're scared of actually going against the administration. And let me just remind you, this is not an isolated incident. Trump has spent years calling the news the enemy of the people, the fake news, dishonest. He's threatened to jail reporters. He's revoked broadcast licenses and tried to sue people to revoke broadcast licenses. He's even called for entire networks to be taken off the air if their coverage displeases him. They banned AP News. So these aren't just like rhetorical flourishes or things that Trump posts about. He actually acts upon them and undermines the First Amendment right and the role of a free press in American society. I know this doesn't have to be said, but Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans do not care about the Constitution. And what we're seeing is sort of a more insidious phenomenon that we can call the normalization of media intimidation as a tool of governance. I've talked about the chilling effect before, and I've explained that before, where journalists self-censor out of fear. But we're entering an era where political leaders and their allies are actively using both legal and extra-legal means to undermine anything the media tries to cover that reflects poorly on them. They use physical violence. We've seen the videos of Lauren Tomasi. They use public intimidation. They use regulatory threats. They use public shaming, employment pressure. We've seen it all just to make the reporting in and of itself seem hazardous. Okay. All of that being said, I do want to say, we are the variable they didn't think about. You guys, us. The videos that we make every single day that reach millions of people, that's a variable the Trump administration did not think about as they were attacking law firms, universities, courts, the media, etc., etc. So all that I ask is that you drop a like to help boost the video. Subscribe below. We will continue to relentlessly push back. If you never want to miss a video or a live stream, click the notification bell. Love you all, and peace out.